A very good evening to you, wherever you are, and welcome to the program Beyond the Headlines. Today being the 17th day of September, the year 2017. We want to talk about education and especially the education sector, considering that we have been facing a number of challenges and both coalitions, we're talking about the NASA coalition and the Jubilee government, all promising to roll out free secondary education. If NASA had taken power, we should be talking about September, that is this month, but owing to what has happened, we are talking about waiting for a repeat of the presidential poll. But Jubilee had promised beginning January, they will have, or they will introduce free secondary education if they take power. But a number of challenges come into play, and that's what we want to talk about. And in studio this evening is Kibra Member of Parliament, Hon.Ken Okoth, and is also the Chairman Parliamentary Caucus on SDGs, that is Sustainable Development Goals and Business, that is. Karibu sana mheshimiwa to the program.
Asante.
We are also expecting the National Coordinator, that is Elimu Yetu Coalition, Janet Muthoni. She will be here with us in a short while. And as well, we're expecting Murang'a County Women Representative Hon.Sabina Chege. All will be here so that we take this discussion a notch higher. But if you want to be part of this conversation, Jen Wamboy is here to let you know how you can do it. Over to you, Jen.
Good evening, Martin.
Good evening.
Good to have you. All right, welcome once again to Beyond the Headlines. My name is Jane Wamboy. Now, as already mentioned by Martin, in today's discussion, we will be looking at matters to do with the secondary education. Now, during the campaigns, we saw the two major parties come out to pledge on the implementation of free secondary education once they assumed power. Now, NASA gave a 90-day period in which they would implement this policy, while Jubilee said they would do it progressively. Now, according to education experts, in order to ensure 100% of the transition of pupils from free primary education into the free secondary education program, it would cost the nation approximately 60 billion Kenya shillings, which the taxpayer will have to foot. Now, today we're just looking to find out what are some of the unforeseen challenges that will come with this program of free secondary education, and of course, paying key attention on the financial implication that it will have on the taxpayer. As always, we do appreciate your feedback, so go ahead and talk to us and be part of this discussion. On Twitter, we are using the hashtag BTHKBC, and the handle is at KBC Channel 1, and our SMS line is 22162. Do leave a name and let us know where you're watching us from. We will be sampling your views and comments as we proceed on with the show. But for now, the conversation begins. Martin, take it away.
Thank you, Jen Wamboy, for that, and we look forward to those comments regarding the topic of discussion. And just to let you know that Hon.Sabina Chege is already here with us, and she'll be joining us in a short while. But in the meantime, we begin, and once she joins us, we'll let you know. Mheshimiwa Ken Okoth, let's just begin by way of looking at education from a broader perspective, and look at the constitution that was passed in 2010, promulgated in August, that is the year 2010. What does it talk about when we talk about free secondary education, or when we talk about the education sector as a whole?
I think historical background, Kenya at independence, one of the biggest things that our founding fathers said was we need to fight against ignorance, we need to fight against poverty, we need to fight against disease. Ignorance, the cure for it is an education system that's of high quality, that meets our needs and is targeted to the realities of Kenya. A quality education system and outcomes for our children actually will help us to solve the other problems of poverty and the issues of disease much easier. So I think when you fast forward from that 54 years ago to more recent, the Constitution of 2010, which we are now working hard to implement, one of the places we all agree on is we must do better on education. The Constitution of Kenya has an article that says every child has the right to a free and compulsory basic education. Basic education is basically from preschool, class 1, primary school, up to Form 4, year 12. That is the definition of basic education. So I want all Kenyan parents and families to understand that actually the constitutional right for our children is free and compulsory basic education. There are many players who must contribute to this. Early childhood education is given to our county governments, and it's a devolved function. Primary and secondary education is still with the national government, but the capacity issues are there. The innovation and the curriculum improvement issues are things that all partners and stakeholders must contribute to. So that is a big deal, and as you can see, there's capacity issues. Many of our children do not have access to government schools, so the promise of a free and compulsory education is not real for many of our children yet. A huge percentage of our children still go to low-cost private school, and some of them whose parents are well off choose to go to high-cost private schools, both at primary school and secondary school level. At secondary school level, you see the demand is very high. Again, we don't have the capacity, so the full transition rate from class 8 to Form 1. But these are the things that in our constitution, and the challenge is for us to implement them and make sure the children enjoy those rights. Those rights are actually also international. The UN Charter of Human Rights, that's international law that Kenya has signed that convention. The Convention on the Rights of the Child, in our own Vision 2030, the socio-economic pillar of how we develop forward, puts a very strong emphasis on education, including this relevant education beyond just the basic education, but actually to technical education. And then the African Union Agenda 2063. As you said in the introduction, I'm the chairman of the Parliamentary Caucus on Sustainable Development Goals. And Kenya was one of the lead countries that led to the negotiation and adoption of the SDGs after the MDGs. It was Kenya and Ireland that co-chaired that. And we have a caucus in Parliament of 20 MPs who are very dedicated to this issue. And goal number 4 of the SDGs is about education. So I look forward to really having a fuller discussion of saying, where are the challenges now? What are the solutions we can do to make sure in the next 3, 4, 5 years, the status of education in Kenya has improved, the access and the quality.
Well said, and it's an elaborate background, and that's why I want to bring in now Hon.Sabina Chege. She's the Murang'a County Human Representative and a former colleague here who was going to be John the Baptist, going to prepare the way for some of us. Karibu sana to the program, and happy to have you.
Thank you very much.
At least you come at a time Ken Okoth has actually elaborated what we are talking about, and let's pick it from there, because you have been, or you are the chairperson of the Education Committee in Parliament, and one, Mheshimiwa Okoth talks about the status of education in this country and the basic acts that guide the education sector and all that he has related to. I want to refer then to a report that was done in Liberia, and it's called the Partnership Schools for Liberia, for example. And it talks about Sub-Saharan Africa has the fastest growing and youngest population in the world, with around 1 billion children needing to be educated in the coming 3 decades. However, there are challenges of access, quality and relevance within the education sector. And that's the situation perhaps in this country. So the question will be, since the introduction of free secondary education in 2003, that's free primary education, because secondary is a question that we are going to tackle. What do you think Jubilee government has done to try and ensure that the issues of access, quality and relevance within the education sector are issues that are well articulated?
I guess it has been a long journey from 2013 when myself and Ken joined the Education Committee, and we found several challenges. And the first one was actually even about the teachers' satisfaction. And we had the strike, the mothers of our strike. We have now come up with a CBA that was signed by the teachers and the employer. And so one is to make sure that even if our children are going to school, then there's somebody to teach them. And before then we had reports of whether our children are actually learning or not learning in school. And so that those were some of the challenges, to make sure that yes, our children are in school, but they're also learning, not just being there and there's nobody to teach them. Secondly, we also looked at the curriculum. It has also been a long process where we did the curriculum review. And back this year, June, they started piloting. There's a lot to be done. There was a lot of engagement with the stakeholders. We've had several meetings with several stakeholders, looking at the way our curriculum is at, looking at the content, what we offer. And there was there's a suggestion of an overhaul, where we look at the children from the formative age. Currently, as Ken Okoth explained, our ECD, or early childhood education, has been left to the county government. And I think as a nation, that's where we lost it, because we've never been serious. If you came from the same background I came from, my village, The nursery school was either belonged to a church or a retired teacher is the one who was teaching, and we didn't put much emphasis on that early childhood education. So from nursery, then from study one, then the government picks up. But there have been a disconnect, and a very big disconnect between the early childhood education, that preparation, and that's the foundation of any education. And so I feel with the new curriculum, the new suggestions, then we are going to have a better way of handling the early childhood education, so that then there's a consistency and there's a smooth transition on the early years, and then going to the upper primary, and then by the time the child is in upper primary, then they're able to know their ability or where they are well talented. The theme of the new curriculum, they say every child has a potential, because we have had a system where we had our children going to a system and finishing class 8, then you sit for an examination that is 3 days if it's for KCP, that judges our children so harshly, not looking at how they have performed before, whether one was sick or not. And then we're going again 4 years to high school, and then you have a system of education that tells you you have lost it. And we had the transition between primary and secondary was it was not a very good transition. And so with a new kind of a system, then we know the ones who are talented, the ones who don't need to pursue some subject. Till today there are some subjects I did in school, and I wonder, I asked myself, why was I even being told? Because I've never applied them. And so we have a better kind of a system, and I'm hoping then the implementers and the people who are involved, there'll be proper training. And of course, then also we need the books, and we need the teachers also to be trained, because there's such kind of a new system. But the beauty of it is that we also need to bring up a wholesome being. We subjected our children to a kind of a system of education where they focused on passing an examination. We forgot that, yes, we also need to teach them morals. We also need them to learn other things, the co-curricular activities, and some schools totally ignored. And that's why we had a lot of cheating in the examination, where we even had parents colluding and also buying the papers, examination papers. So we lost it. And basically, I'm hoping now, once we do the implementation of the new curriculum, then we'll have a system where a child is able to grow, and they're able to, their talent is tapped at an early age. And if you want to know a kind of a system of education that has a problem, is where we have musicians like Akinawa who did mathematics. They discovered their talent after they were in the university.
They were in university. So
I'm sure that talent would have been discovered at a very young and tender age. And so we have also done a lot of amendments in our Basic Education Act, and unfortunately, by the time we finished the 11th Parliament, there were some things around the Senate, and that's what we're going to pursue now, to make sure that it comes back to the National Assembly, so that we have harmony. And finally, we're also looking at partnership, because the government cannot be able to do it all alone.
And I'll be talking about the question of partnership,
yes,
later in this program, because that is key. But I want to take you back to the question of Basic Act. And Mheshimiwa Ken Okoth, you did refer to it, and Mheshimiwa Chege raises a fundamental issue of the question of ECD. And do you feel like it was premature to leave the question of ECD to county governments? And number two, how does the suggested curriculum cure the maladjustments that affect that particular section?
I think the timing is right. We have to give some responsibilities to county governments, and we also have to give them the resources to implement those. You see, the beauty about devolution is to decentralize power and to bring resources and services closer to the people, where it meets their needs at the ground level. Mm-hmm. So I think it's not a bad thing. And there are many countries that have devolved systems of government and shared authority over certain things. In the United States, states determine at state level, not government at the federal, national level, all state education policies. Each state, and sometimes under the states, even the counties. If you go to India, it's the same. If you go to Nigeria, it's the same. So it's not a special thing. Let us start somewhere and see what innovations can be done there. But as you said before, when you introduced Honorable Sabina and summarized that report, the key question for us in the issues of education is access, relevance, and quality. And the challenge for Kenya, when we look at the legal framework, we look at the partnership and funding structures and all of that, it comes back to question of access. Does every child have the access that is their constitutional right? Once you go from access, is what they're being taught within that school system appropriate, relevant, And are they taught and able to learn at a quality level? Are they supplied with the resources, or is a human resource capital and anything else they need, that all children are receiving a quality education? As they say in Kiswahili, so they don't just get a bora elimu, but they actually get elimu bora. So I think that to me is a good way to structure a discussion and think about it, and it takes a lot of initiative. You talked about the partnership schools in Liberia. That's one example of a country that came out of war and had lost a generation or two of teachers and another group of people who had never gone to school, and to try to rebuild a school system. For the last 14, 15 years, they've been pumping money in, but not getting the solutions. And I think we have to be very innovative, because these challenges are not unique. But even in advanced countries, if you look at the United Kingdom, if you look at the US, the question actually, when you go back to those three things you talked about, access, relevance, quality. In the advanced countries, access is not a problem. It's relevance and quality, so that you find children from poorer neighborhoods are not getting a relevant education or a quality education, and children from a richer neighborhood are getting. In Africa, it's access, relevance, and quality. And I'll tell you, one of my friends summarized this. He said, the problem with our education system, and in many parts of the world, is we have an education system that was designed in the 19th century for the first industrial revolution. And it was meant to deliver things and services and produce a workforce for the 20th century. And now we're in the 21st century, and it's completely outdated. We're looking at the fourth industrial revolution. After e-commerce and the internet, now we've moved on to things like artificial intelligence, robotics. Is our education system accessible to all children? Is it relevant, you know, for kids who are artistic and can pursue talents, music, sports, and things like that, sciences, you name it? And are the children getting the quality? So we have a challenge in our hands as lawmakers, as leaders, as stakeholders and policymakers in this area, to come up with solutions and to learn from where solutions are being found. And I would say that report from Liberia, I just read it this week, is very encouraging. Liberia said, we're going to think outside the box. We're going to throw out the box and invite people. And I think in Liberia, they invited 29 different partners to work with the government. So some schools are fully run by the government. Some schools are run by some of these partners, are charity missions, Christian organizations, with strict contracts with the government on what are their deliverables in outcomes, what are the expectations. So the schools are still belonging to the government, but different people have been given contracts to run the schools. In the United States, they've done charter schools. It started a lot under President Clinton and then became huge under President George Bush. They had a No Child Left Behind law, which did certain things, and then under President Obama, they had a policy called Race to the Top, so that each state would innovate and get more money. If they were showing relevance and quality in outcomes, they would get more money from the federal government. So I think even for us, Kenya, we must think and see the examples we can borrow from places like Nigeria, which some of the states like Ogun are doing partnerships with private companies to build for them the schools or to operate for them the schools. You've got in India places like Andhra Pradesh, they're doing the same. In Kenya, I think we really need to innovate. Right now, we still have a very strict sort of dichotomy of private and government schools. But there's nothing like a private child. All children are Kenyan children, and they should get a quality education, whether they go to a private school or a government school, high cost or low cost.
Well said, and we'll be talking about the question of quality when I get back to Hon.Sabina Chege as well. But let me introduce Janet Muthoni, who is the National Coordinator, Elimu Yetu Coalition. Karibu sana to the program.
Thank you very much.
We normally say better late than never,
Sure,
and
sure.
Happy to have you. You just come at a time we are looking at the Basic Education Act and the whole question of free primary education. We are talking about free secondary education now, but let's look at free secondary primary education or basic education in terms of quality and relevance. How do you rate the country's education sector in terms of those two?
It depends with what you want to gauge Kenya against, because if you want to gauge us against our neighbors, then I think we are doing fairly well. You really can't complain much in terms of quality, in terms of access and so much. But then I think we want to gauge ourselves based on who exactly are we and where do we want to go, and sort of looking at our constitution as the benchmark because we've agreed, all of us, that it is criminal to leave any child outside our infrastructure. But how many children have we left out? Then that becomes really vindicative on our part, that we really are not doing the best. When you talk about the question of relevance and, you know, and the kind of quality that we are offering, you still want to look within, because you're talking about reports from Uwezo saying that a class 7 child cannot handle class 2 work. Then I think we are as guilty, you know. And then also looking at, there's so much feedback we've been receiving from the employers, and they're talking about, you know, the kind of people that our education, you know, framework is getting out there. The job market is not as good as it would want. So really, I want to say that we have done well, we have tried, and I want to judge Kenya based on what have the international instruments talked about. If you look at our investment in education, we are not doing any badly. We are doing above 20% of our national budget and above 6% of our GDP. So really, we are not doing badly. And I think the question really comes, and I really like the contribution of Honorable Ken Okoth, that are we really thinking outside? Okay, do we even want this box in the first place? Because I think that restricting ourselves to the box is what has messed us up, you know. Because walking to the slums and looking at the schools that are now called non-formal schools, and thinking that this is a government that is operating with still non-formal schools, acknowledging that they do exist, but then looking at the infrastructure, they are saying, no, strictly this is what we can admit as a school. But then you ask, so have you been able to provide those kinds of standard schools that you're talking about in all the situations that avail? And the answer is no. So there's really need for us to sort of look at the frameworks that we have and say, are they working for us? And us here means every child. You cannot look for the us here and say me. No, you can't do that, because the constitution is clear. We cannot leave any child behind. But as it is now, we have about 1 million children out of the primary school subsector. It is not good enough. Come to the secondary school, for example.
1 million in terms of they're not accessing?
Yeah, they're not in school.
Well, the question will be why, when we have free primary education?
I like this question, especially when I have my friend here, Sabina Chege here, and you know, and we the only thing that I would want us to admit, because sometimes it's good for us as Kenyans to have very candid discussions. We have to admit that yes, government has done a lot. Kenya has been admired by many nations by being bold. You know, 2003 we are here saying primary school is going to be free, and now both NASA and Jubilee are saying secondary school is going to be free. I think that for me is very goodwill from the political class. So let me ask a question about our technocrats and probably the infrastructures that we have, such as parliament. How are we translating this goodwill to work for our children? Because I think that's where the disconnect is. We need the technocrats, the Ministry of Education, to translate this goodwill into action in terms of saying, you are the political class that told us that you want primary school to be free. This is what we are thinking. This thing doesn't have to be very expensive. I honestly get sick when someone tells me that there is any secondary school in Kenya that can cost 100,000 shillings. But it is there. It is there. It cannot cost that, because what exactly are we saying? I think, but we are not very far, because we are beginning the discourse. I like the discussion that has dominated the last about 3 weeks, us asking ourselves, do we really need boarding schools? And I'm the people who say we actually don't need them, especially if it attracts a barrier to access, because so many children are now outside secondary school framework, because when it is a day school, it is charged about 13,000. But when it is a boarding school, then it becomes a minimum of 36, 40, 50, 70. So sleeping in school actually becomes very expensive.
But then what happened, Mheshimiwa Chege, as you come in? Because the last time I checked, the Education CS did put a cap when it comes to the question of boarding schools. And I remember it was around 55,000. But this is just on paper.
It was 53,000.
53,000. So what happened in terms of walking the talk?
I guess it's not just on paper, because we saw a lot of children then when the minister gave the directive accessing to school. But even 53,000 for a normal parent is not cheap. It is still very expensive. And the 53,000, that one was for maybe the national schools, you know. But that was the maximum. It was not meant to be 53,000 that all schools must charge. They were told don't go beyond 53. But we have a very interesting nation where sometimes the parents will go and decide they want to add more money because of their comfort, according to them, of their children. And so So when the ministry then gives a maximum, and then the parents goes to a meeting and decide then we want to add more money, then it becomes very difficult. Though the minister gave a directive and said before any increase or increment of school fees, they should be allowed, they should actually write to the ministry. There are procedures. But are they being followed? No. And we have a very big challenge. When we ask the ministry, they say we are not the employer of the teachers. And that's why there was a discussion earlier whether then the principals should be employed by the ministry or given the managerial position by the ministry, because it's a responsibility. It's the same thing. When you say when the child finishes Form 4, give the certificate whether they have cleared the school fees or not. And we still have so many children, even today. So many children, they call me and say, we have not been given the certificate because the principal has refused to give us the certificate. Well, that's what I say. We have a very interesting nation because we have very good laws. We have actually given education a lot of money. And even now, as Muthoni said, it's not about whether the government can afford. There's actually a lot of money. For instance, with the money that we spend on the CDF, around 120 million might be 70%, which is around 70 million, should go to education. And they have been told half of that can go to infrastructure. Then half of that, which is roughly around 35 million, should go now to the bursaries and the likes. This is the money that is already the government money. And a member of parliament has been given that money. So it is very easy for the government actually to convert that money and make sure that every child who is going to school, their school fees is paid. It is not something that is very difficult. But what we do, and even within the ministry, the government gives a lot of money, but even accounting for that money, well, very little gets to what it was intended to do. And that is the biggest challenge we have. People need to be very sincere. I think there's a time we had a visit and we went to Brazil, and I liked what Ken said about the early childhood, being devolved. I went to Brazil and I saw the government actually gives target. And the county governments, they are allowed to, you write your own report and you say, this is what we want to achieve. If you actually achieve, you have a chance to be added more money. But if you do not achieve, then you're not even given that money. So, but in Kenya, there's something like people can just spend money the way they wish or the way they want. We will allocate money in the budget, but somebody decides that this money needs to be diverted to another cause that was not what was budgeted for. I think we need to be more responsible. There's goodwill from the government, and I think from both sides, from the Jubilee government, even from NASA. And it's only that the Jubilee said it's progressive because you have to do it very well. You have to be sure. You can't just say, come January, then everything is free. Because there are things that you need to look at, the number of children, what is needed in each and every school. And it was very sad when what happened in Moi Girls, and I visited the dormitories. And what I saw I didn't like. There's a lot of congestion in those schools. Well, in the same school, and then I don't know whether it was, I saw it in the social media, that they are building a new chapel. And the question is, what would have been a priority? Is it to increase the number of dormitories, or is it to build a new chapel? I think we need to sit down as stakeholders and let's involve everybody, because there's goodwill and there's enough money, and our children can go to school. They can have access. Today, I still see news that there are some primary schools that the children are still going to school under a tree. And it's ridiculous. Every other county government has been given money. The MP of that region has been given CDF. How do we then get our children going to school under a tree? And most of these vulnerable counties, by the way, they benefit from the money. Like, for example, a county like Turkana County, they get more money than any other county. They get a lot of money. Secondly, the CDF, the people who are members from that region, because of the poverty index, they're also given more money. There is also money that is called Equalization Fund, still going to the same region. We have also a lot of donors attracted, and they go to the same region. So I think we need to be accountable. And once we are accountable as a nation, then our children will have access to the school. Then the issues of relevance and quality then can be handled when we look at the curriculum. So
the question will be, listening to both of you, we seem to be having a suggestion or an argument that we seem to have good laws, but the question is implementation. Here's a situation where you come and the government says, listen, if you're a Form 4 leaver and you finished Form 4, you can just go back to your school and take that certificate. That is not implemented. Many students are not getting those certificates. You have a situation where you talk about secondary education and you say that we are capping at 53,000, but you walk across the schools, most schools are charging it at 100,000 plus. So where's the missing link? What do we do to ensure that whatever we say or whatever is provided in the law, we walk the talk the other side, Mheshimiwa Okoth?
I think I'll start with something that Honorable Sabina just said about CDF and the role of it, and of course equalization fund, and parts of this country that are still lagging behind, and children shamefully and sadly are still learning under the trees. These are not problems that happened yesterday or began 5 years ago, to be honest. They're not problems that only happened under the Jubilee government. These are problems that started 54 years ago. You know, CDF has only been around for 15 years. County governments have been around for less than 5 years. So let us not say county governments in 5 years have not solved problems. Have been there for 4 years. We're challenging all governors. You're in charge of ECD. Give us quality. And as she said, even in Brazil, the state government, the federal government sets targets for the regional governments on the aspects of education they're in charge of. If they do well and they meet those targets in terms of learning outcomes, quality, transition rates, they're rewarded with more money and other things. If they actually fail, some of that money can be taken away, but their autonomy and control over those issues can actually be taken away and reverted to, you know, we've had even in the United States, the legal framework is said that the school districts within county levels within the states are run by local committees and decision makers and parents associations at that level. But if they are not showing the outcomes and meeting the standards at a national and a state level, that autonomy can be taken away and can be granted to a state body to control until things are fixed, because the shelf life for a child to go to school and be in kindergarten is very short and perishable. A child is only young once to be age of kindergarten, and you can't have a system that continuously fails. So we have to have those discussions, and I think Kenya is on the right track, the way Janet said it. Are we there where we need to be? No. Is the challenge in front of us huge? Yes, it is. Can we do it? Yeah, and I would put it into 3 important things. Choice. Do parents have a choice? Number 2, competition. Is there competition and innovation within the system? Do the parents have a choice? Why do they only see a school? And she mentioned very sadly a school in my constituency. We've just had a tragedy, and we're praying and condoling with the family of the 9 girls who were lost at Moi Girls in Kibra. But this tragedy could have happened in so many other Kenyan schools because of the overcrowding. What is it that we can do to bring in choice and competition and create innovation so that and I'll give you the solution for me, I think. If you talk about even free secondary education, we're talking about 60 billion per year to implement it progressively as has been proposed. I think we really need to think how do we bring in partners, what incentives do we give them to create capacity, to create choice and diversity, and to allow parents to move with the money for their children. So that if you have a child at Moi Girls School and you feel it is too crowded, you can move your child from Moi Girls School with a capitation of 50,000 shillings from the Kenyan government as a taxpayer, and you know your child and their number, and you go re-register them at another school, Olympic High School, a day school, and pay for them. If you think that's a day school that has a soccer program, that has a music program, is closer home to you, you can more monitor your child and they stay at home, you move your child and the money moves with them. Schools that don't perform, children will move and go to other choices. But I think even the private providers and alternative providers and partners, we have in our law what is known as UPBET. People are still talking about non-formal schools, informal schools. There's nothing like that. These children are all doing the same curriculum, 8-4-4. And if you're doing an 8-4-4 curriculum, the rest is irrelevant and technical mumbo jumbo, but bureaucracy. The fact of the matter is the government paying for your education to provide and support and facilitate free and compulsory basic education, preschool, primary school, secondary school, up to year 12. That is a right. And the government just needs to come up with a way of reimagining the money. Suddenly you'll see parents in Kibra, if they are told the capitation for your child is 25,000 in primary school, and you can choose to walk from Kibera across the road to Makini School in Kilimani with a voucher from the government and cash that in. And if Makini School costs only 35,000 and you have 25,000 from the government, some parent in Kibera will invest an extra 10,000 and move their child with that government voucher. And the schools in Kibra, to remain relevant and compete, will have to raise their standards to meet the value that is being produced at Makini.
Well, and I'll be crossing over to Janet just in a while, but let me cross over to Jen Wamboi so that we have a reaction from Kenyans, what they're saying in relation to the topic of discussion. Over to you, Jen Wamboi.
Yes, Martin, remember we're looking at the implementation, the pledges that were made by the two major parties in regard to implementing free secondary education in the country and what unforeseen impact it will have in the country. Thank you very much for your feedback. Hashtag BTH on Twitter. Let me just sample some of the views that we are receiving. Oh my God, the conversation is really intense on Twitter. I see Ogeto saying, a system where a class 7 pupil can't handle class 2 work needs reforms. All right. Train Mover saying, education in Kenya nowadays is last priority, sadly. William Lucky also agreeing with what Ogeto was saying. You find a situation where a class 7 pupil cannot do class 2 work, which is a sad situation, just to say. I see Kipleting Collins saying, the private institution should partner with the government to foster better education with the free secondary education program. I see Sanctioned Ian Mark enjoying the discussion, Eto enjoying the discussion. He also goes on to say the legal framework within the education system gives children rights that end up lowering discipline standards in the school. Again, the question of discipline has been brought into the topic. Kelvin Mugendi saying, after 1 year, public schools managed by private operators raised learning by 60%. Maybe you could let us know that is research by who. I see Bright International, of course, retweeting some of the views that we have received so far. Peter Karoki saying, the thing is, in reality, free education is practical, but only if corruption is dead. All right, the question of corruption again has been brought in. Josephine Omaitha saying, I would like to know what will happen to the current crop of students, that is the class 8 and Form 4, if the change is implemented. That is just some of what has been sent in. We will be sampling more as we proceed on with the show. But Martin, maybe you could address the whole question of corruption. Also the question of making NYS compulsory has been brought up. Corruption, NYS, the education system, and phasing off of the 844 system. Keep them coming in. We'll be sampling them as we proceed on. Over to you.
Thank you, Jane Wamboi, for those reactions. I can see Twitter is on fire. Let me begin with Janet, just reacting to some of those comments, if you may, especially the question of free secondary education. In fact, there's one here who asked a very interesting question. Fanon Themas asks, how much will free secondary education cost? That seems to be a question that people seem to have to raise.
Well, I think the question of education, of course, attracts a lot of emotion, especially because every household in this country is touched by the subject. And I'm glad today to be sharing a forum with great people here, and I would want to really, not like I'm campaigning for them, but I would want them to join the Education Committee of Parliament, another session again. Why? Because when I listen to Honorable Ken Okoth and Honorable Sabina, I get a feeling of people that really know what exactly should be done. Why it never gets done, I wonder whether in their positions, maybe they're not able to influence a few of the things. And I'm going to illustrate what I'm saying. If you look at the reforms that have been introduced at the Ministry of Education, it's promising, so to say, because there's a situation that has come rapidly to correct so many things that all of us thought that probably they could never have been confronted, but now they have. And at least we can walk towards the national examinations. I know some people will argue that we are already doing badly with our national examinations, but we can't, if we're already doing badly, we can't move on with a fraudulent system. So there is a situation attempting to correct the fraud. But when I look at the Kenya National Examinations Council Act, it still remains as it were. So there are some reforms that should happen around it so that we get to where we are supposed to be. That has not happened.
Which are some of the reforms you think should be?
Some of the reforms revolve around, for example, if you look at what is happening now, what Dr. Matiang'i and NEC are doing is not what is in the NEC Act. That tells you there is reform. So I'd like to see a situation where the Kenya National Examination Council Act addresses itself to the current situation so that then it doesn't become a question of when this person is not there, then we slide back to where we were. And I know sometimes we try and blame people, but sometimes systemic challenges, which probably they would share with us some of those systemic challenges. But this is what I would like to say as a Kenyan. If a child can sleep in a mud house, why won't they be allowed to enjoy a classroom with the same mud house? Don't talk to me about dignity of a classroom when I have no dignity in my home. If I can sleep and abide happily in a mud house, then I can as well go to a classroom that has mud walls. That is the kind of reasoning that, don't tell me about standards, it should be this way. No, let us confront our challenges. That we do not have enough classrooms. Why? Because we are looking for stone, we are looking for concrete, we cannot be able to expand the schools that we have. I think for me, we are putting for ourselves barriers that really do not exist. Talk about free secondary education. I know it is possible because we are not the first country to do that. But there are some challenges we have put on ourselves. Why, for example, would we have so various charges across schools? You find the school is having menu A, menu B, and menu C. Why won't we just have a standard way of doing things? Simple things, but I don't know why they are not being implemented. And this is why I invite my colleagues, my friends here from Parliament. Can we stop seeing a Parliament that is so much oversighting about resources and is not oversighting the implementation of laws that they have formed? Because the Basic Education Act is an act of Parliament. So when it is being floated, I think for me, it's an assault on the same Parliament that really, instituted that law. So we want to see a Parliament that is really exercising a lot of oversight in the implementation of laws and the policies of the Ministry of Education, because that is where the thing is. If the ministry admits that it is the chiefs, for example, and I would want to give this example. When it was time for registering to be a voter, chiefs were very busy and active and very much engaged to go in every house, getting people come and pick IDs and so on. But when it comes to the role of the chief, that is in the Basic Education Act, to go and tell Kenyans that this child is at home, she's not at school, the chiefs are absent, they are not there. I think for me, it's terrible, it's not excusable, we're just lousy, we don't want to do the right thing. Yeah.
So you seem to raise the issue, and that's why I asked the question that, Mheshimiwa Chege, when we talk about the question of fees, for example, 53,000, we refer to a situation like at Moi Girls Secondary School, where a dormitory is burnt, but reports indicated that there were metal grills on those windows. I remember the last time there was an order or directive given that those grills should be removed in secondary, especially in boarding schools, when you talk about the dormitories. And Janet raises a fundamental question, that are we so much obsessed in oversighting resources at the expense of laws, which we have anyway?
I guess, again, because of the same constitution, we have a role, and our role is legislation. And it's very clear that we have the executive and we have now the parliament. And so I am very sure Ken will tell you there's much that he can only do for his schools, but sometimes you'll seem to be like an intruder. If already we have done the laws, the Ministry of Education, they are supposed to do the follow-up. Again, then you not expect now the members of parliament to be going to inspect the schools, and because there's somebody who clearly has that job. And I think what we need to do now is for us to generally, or for us as Kenyans, whether we are parents or whether we are the stakeholders, I think we just need all of us to be active and not to leave everything to the member of parliament. Because for us, myself and Ken, yes, we'll make those good laws. And then we wait for the ministry to implement. And when we go beyond and ask the ministry, then why are our children still being charged this amount of money? Then they will say either the parents have agreed, or there's this shifting of the blame to the next person. And I think we need to be responsible, and as I said, as a parent, once we're advised, if there's anything that needs to be done, even all those school projects, they should be approved. I think the people should sit down and ask themselves then, what is the condition? If it's the school, what is our priority? And I think it should not come maybe from the teachers, it should come from the parents themselves. And every school actually now, with the new Basic Education Act, there's already we have the BOM, the BOM, we have the PT. We have so many people who are responsible, who are actually supposed to be there and doing the job at school. And so if a school is not supposed to have metal bars at the windows, and then we still have them, then we even ask our parents, do we go and dump our children in school and get comfortable? Because I normally feel very sad when maybe a term is extended. Children are supposed to, either the term is ended earlier, so children are supposed to go home early, or it is the opening is extended. You hear parents complaining. It's like their children have become a burden. They don't want to stay with them. They quickly get to the gate, or they tell the children, bye, get into the matatu, go to school, see you at the closing day. But do they even take time to even go and if there is visiting day, to go and see where their children sleep? Do they engage with them? Do they ask them the conditions they are in? And I think we all need to be responsible. I will do my role as a member of parliament. I'll make the laws so that then even a parent can go and sue the government or they can even go and sue a school because already the law is there. But for a member of parliament, we are not the ones who are supposed to, like to be the prefects of the schools. That is not our role. But we have BOMs, we have PTA, we have the parents, and they should also be responsible. We need to join hands and work together.
But if the education CS is not walking the talk, the law gives you power to summon him.
Of course we do.
So that you say, why is it not happening?
And then the education CS comes in, and I think this was an experience we had last time, when we summoned the education CS and says, my hands are tied because I am not the employer. So what happens even after the reports? Remember last year we had so many schools where we had many cases of fire incidences, and sometimes even some of the teachers incited. Let's not even go to the fires. We even go to the KCP when there was cheating. And then we have some teachers who are assisting the children because we were only punishing the children and withdrawing the examination results. But there were even some teachers, even some parents who actually colluded and helped or assisted in the cheating. And then you ask the ministry, so what happened? We did a report and we wrote to Teacher Service Commission. And now the Teacher Service Commission says, okay, wait a minute, we also need to investigate the case because we are not the ones who did the investigation. Give us time. Really, that's what I'm saying. I think we need harmonization. And we need somehow to have, if the suggestion that came up, and you saw the unions up in arms when the ministry gave a suggestion that they should actually employ the head teachers as managers of the schools so that they are fully responsible. If the issue about the school fees, the issue about handling money, we had some cases of some schools that were given around 25 million, the national schools, for them to do the infrastructure. And some of the audit report, that money cannot be traced. They don't even know where the money went to. And these people are not in jail. And you see, I always feel sad when when such a thing happens, or and a teacher is demoted or transferred from one school to another.
So that you
transfer. So are you transferring corruption?
So we. Jump in there.
Yeah, you jump in as we bring to this to an end because I'm told our time is.
I think there's two conversations we're having in two different tracks.
Yes.
The current Kenyan education system and what is not working within it. And I think, in my opinion, those are tactical corrections that need to be done. The law we have is good. Our overall philosophy and commitment is good. Implementation, oversighting, managing the relationship between TSC as the employer of teachers and the ministry and the national government as the owner of the schools. So you have employers employed to come work in your school, but they don't own it. And how do you manage that? That relationship needs to be looked at carefully. When you're hired as a school principal to manage a school, what are your responsibilities and reporting line and your supervision and everything. So that's important. But I like what Sabina said, there's a lot of bad things. So at that tactical level discussion, there's a lot of things that are falling through the cracks that are not good enough and are painful and even tragic. And we need to have that discussion. On that level, I would say we also need to highlight when good things happen. I'll give you two examples of schools that I know. Starehe Boys Center and Lenana High School. Their money that they were given to build extra dormitories, they built those dormitories immediately because I've got boys in both schools. And those dormitories were built, and those dormitories are not congested. But in the schools that were given the money, and they didn't use it, and the audits, and it's funny, it's almost like there's a cartel with the BOM and with the ministry supervisors, and this money disappears through Kenyan corruption, and then the children are denied a dorm, and then they are staffed in cramped dorms. So the example of Moi girls is only important to us, and we honor the legacy of those girls if we can use that. But I think the second track of the discussion is more a strategic one. How do we implement free secondary education so all our children can reach up to year 12 of basic education for free? An education system that's relevant as we are adjusting the curriculum to have tracks for sports, arts, entertainment, sciences, humanities, relevance, but also finally making sure that there's equity and access. Do we build more day schools in our communities through CDF or something to make sure people have? And I can say I'm happy in Kibra we have started.
Thank you very much. And this is a discussion I think we should push to next weekend, going by Twitter and the reactions there. And I can assure you, if you commit to be available, let's take this discussion a notch higher, because Beyond the Headlines is there for such programs. Janet, I'll be unfair if I don't give you 10 seconds, your closing remarks. Just 10 seconds.
Yeah, I just look forward really to a situation where January is not far. So should it be NASA, should it be Jubilee?
If January it's NASA, I don't know whether they're going to implement it now next month.
Jubilee,
if it happens.
Yeah, we cannot. Let me tell you, you drive along Korokocho, and it is just littered with children who are not going to school. It is an eyesore. We cannot consider like that. Let us do anything that we can, be it adding an extra mud classroom or whatever. Let us get those children to the infrastructure. We have to get them.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Janet Okoth, the National Coordinator, Elimu Yetu Coalition, and education expert. And thank you, Hon.Sabina Chege, all the way from Murang'a, for getting time to be with us. And lastly, Hon.Ken Okoth, we will be watching the 12th Parliament, especially now that Janet is here, to let you know. And we wait to see when free secondary education is going to be implemented. My name is Martin Mwanja. I'll cross over to Janet Muthoni to bring this to an end.
As you have heard, this is not a conversation that we can exhaust in this one sitting. So, of course, we'll look forward to make more time to continue with this discussion. But that is all the time we had for today's show. Thank you very much for your feedback. Twitter was on fire. We do appreciate your feedback so much. Let's keep the conversation going. We'll be addressing them in the next show. My name is Janet Muthoni. Thank you very much once again. Do enjoy the rest of your viewing.